Hey guys, tonight we drift backward in time, far deeper than your body probably wants to be awake for. You're here, tucked under your blanket, staring into the darkness of your room, but suddenly you feel the ground soften, the air grow heavy, and the stars fade into a ceiling of endless green. You're standing in a forest that's been gone for over 100 million years. Ferns crowd your knees. The trunks of cycads rise like pillars, and giant conifers stitch the sky together overhead. A damp breeze presses against your face. You can almost smell resin and damp clay. And somewhere, just beyond the curtain of foliage, something massive exhales. You're in the early Cretaceous, a place where nothing cares about you. Every insect buzzes like a lawnmower, and lizards scatter beneath your feet. If you've ever complained about mosquitoes, you should know that their ancient cousins are practically dive bombers here. You're not built for this place, you probably won't survive this night, but that's okay. You don't need to. You're just a quiet traveler in someone else's world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know your location and the time on your clock in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, brushing ferns away from your arms, your shoes sinking into damp soil. Above you, a sharp cry echoes, half bird, half reptile. A pterosaur, wings broad as your living room ceiling, flaps clumsily across the sky. But you're not here for them. You're here for a creature almost erased by time, its name whispered only in fossil halls and footnotes, Acrocanthosaurus, the high-spined lizard. At first, you don't see it. That's the trick with history. Sometimes the biggest players are shadows until the dust is brushed away. In this forest, predators are never in a hurry. You pause, hearing the crunch of branches, the slow thunder of steps, and your heartbeat keeps pace with it. The earth doesn't shake like in the movies. It just sighs under weight too ancient for your mind to really measure. A shape slides between the trees. It's taller than your neighbor's house, a ridge-backed silhouette carved out of darkness. You catch the line of its neural spines, jagged like the roof of an old castle, rising along its back. This isn't a Rex cameo. This is something older, stranger, half-forgotten, a beast that science itself nearly misplaced. You pull closer, hiding behind a cluster of cycads, their leaves sharp as swords. The air is tense, humid, pressing. The Acrocanthosaurus lowers its head, eyes glinting amber as it studies a clearing where a herd of ornithopods shift nervously. There's no rush. This predator doesn't sprint like a cheetah. It waits, calculating, steps heavy but deliberate. Historians still argue whether this giant was a solitary stalker or part of a loose coalition of hunters. Some theories suggest it may have coordinated attacks. Others think it was too bulky, too proud, to share its kills. The truth drifts somewhere between. You watch as it tests the air with wide nostrils, a reminder that olfactory bulbs don't fossilize, but they leave hints in cavities. The smell of prey is everything. The forest itself feels complicit. These trees, these rivers, these buzzing swarms, they all existed not for you, but for the Acrocanthosaurus. And yet, for millions of years after its bones sank into mud, no one remembered it walked here. Civilizations rose, pyramids pierced skies, empires burned, and still the high-spined lizard lay buried, as if waiting for someone like you to wander back through the night and notice it again. You shift your stance, trying not to laugh at the irony. Here you are, worried about whether your blanket is warm enough, while a 6-ton reptile strolls casually through its primeval kingdom. It sneezes, a wet, bass-heavy blast that startles the ornithopods into a scramble, and you have to bite your tongue to avoid chuckling. If dinosaurs sneezed this loud, allergy season back then must have been a nightmare. The Acrocanthosaurus doesn't rush. It lumbers forward, spines flexing like the raised sail of a ship, its long tail counterbalancing every step. The herds vanish deeper into the forest, and the predator lets them go. Not hunger tonight, just presence, just ownership of its ancient domain. And you, the traveler, the sleepless wanderer, you stand in the shadows of deep time. You've taken your first step into a story almost erased from history, one will keep walking through together, one stride at a time. You follow the shadow through the ferns, your ears still ringing from that thunderous sneeze, and your eyes catch again on the jagged ridge rising along its back. At first glance, you think it's a trick of the light, like the way shadows sometimes stretch your reflection on a wall. But no. Those vertebrae are real, spines so tall they look like the skeleton is trying to claw its way through its own skin. They march from its neck all the way to its hips, like the dragon's back you sketched on notebook paper when you were supposed to be doing algebra. Only this isn't a doodle. This is anatomy. You edge closer, ducking behind a trunk seeping sticky resin, and let your eyes trace the outline of those strange extensions. Some rise over 2 feet above the bones they anchor to. They aren't decorative like a peacock's feathers, at least not obviously. They aren't weapons either. You can't exactly stab a rival with a row of vertical planks sticking out of your spine. And yet here they are, undeniable, etched in fossil after fossil like some elaborate architectural experiment. Paleontologists first puzzled over them back in the 1940s, when Acrocanthosaurus remains were hauled out of the red dirt of Oklahoma. Long after the fossils dried in plaster jackets, scientists still argued over their purpose. Were the spines supports for a thick hump of muscle, making the animal bulkier and more powerful than its sleek cousins? Or did they hold up a thin sail of skin, a kind of billboard for display, flashing patterns to rivals and mates like some prehistoric Vegas marquee? Historians still argue whether these spines were practical or purely for show. Some claim the raised ridges gave the animal strength, an advantage in wrestling massive prey. Others whisper about thermoregulation, like radiator fins catching sunlight or shedding heat. And, of course, there's the possibility that we're just projecting modern logic onto something far stranger. After all, who's to say dinosaurs didn't have aesthetics? The Acrocanthosaurus you're watching now pauses to scratch its flank against a tree, the spines scraping bark and sending flakes fluttering down like old paint chips. Whatever their function, they certainly make an impression. Even the insects seem to buzz more quietly when it moves past, as if instinct knows better than to disturb something with such a serrated outline. A quirky tidbit: some early fossil hunters mistook fragments of Acrocanthosaurus vertebrae for parts of completely different animals. Imagine puzzling over a single jagged spine and wondering if it belonged to a crocodile or even a giant fish. It wasn't until whole series of bones were aligned that the full picture emerged, and suddenly, a predator with a jagged ridge running down its back took shape on the page. It must have been a strange eureka moment, like realizing the weird Lego piece in your bin actually belonged to a set you forgot you owned. The beast moves on, its tail sweeping a grove of horsetails flat, and you can't stop thinking about those spines. They're not sleek like a sailfish's dorsal fin, not flamboyant like a Dilophosaurus crest. They're raw, blunt, and a little unsettling, like an exposed row of jagged mountains. You wonder what it would be like to run your hand along them. Though let's be honest, you wouldn't get close enough without instantly becoming part of the fossil record yourself. Still, the thought lingers. Maybe these spines were signals of power, silent announcements that said, "I am here, I am strong, I am unlike anything else that walks this earth." If so, the message worked. You feel it even now, millions of years later, standing beneath the shadow of something that time itself nearly erased. And as the Acrocanthosaurus melts back into the green, leaving only the sway of branches in its wake, you realize you've seen its most peculiar feature, the hallmark that kept paleontologists arguing for decades, the spine that rose higher than memory and etched itself into the bones of history. You keep walking, though the Acrocanthosaurus has long since faded into the forest. The spines are gone from view, the heavy footsteps swallowed by cicada buzz and croaking amphibians, but the weight of it lingers. You let the silence stretch, then, like mist pulling back from a river, another world begins to bleed through, the modern one. The forest blurs. The damp smell of resin becomes dust, the buzzing insects fade into the rattle of a pickup truck engine, and suddenly you're no longer in the Cretaceous. You're standing in the American Southwest in the 1940s, sun baking your shoulders, cowboy hat shading your eyes. A crew of fossil hunters bends low over red soil, chisels and brushes in their hands, sweat soaking through shirts. This is where the forgotten giant clawed its way back into human memory. Oklahoma, Texas, maybe even further south, the bones were scattered across layers of sandstone like puzzle pieces from a 1,000-piece set dumped on the floor. You crouch beside one of the paleontologists. He taps at a chunk of stone with delicate precision, as if he's unlocking a secret safe. A shape emerges, a vertebra, half-buried, ridges still sharp after 110 million years of sleep. Someone whistles low, calls over the others. Soon plaster is mixed, bandages rolled, and the fossil is wrapped like a wounded soldier ready to be carried home. The process is slow, achingly so. Weeks in the field, years in storage, decades sometimes before a fragment is given the attention it deserves. Acrocanthosaurus might have stayed forgotten if not for a few stubborn paleontologists who couldn't shake the feeling that these bones weren't just more of the usual suspects. They looked different, taller, stranger. Here's the mainstream fact. Acrocanthosaurus fossils were first formally described in 1950, identified from remains in Oklahoma. At the time, though, the dinosaur barely made headlines. Bigger, flashier predators like T-Rex hogged the spotlight, while this odd high-spined creature was catalogued, noted, and then, practically, shelved. Quirky tidbit? Some early field notes were so minimal, the bones might have been permanently mislabeled if not for persistent checking years later. Imagine finding a 30-foot-long predator and shrugging, just another meat-eater, before moving on to the next rock. That's basically what happened. Acrocanthosaurus was almost doomed to remain a nameless skeleton rattling around in museum basements. Historians still argue whether its long obscurity was due to simple bad luck, poorly preserved fossils, lack of funding, other discoveries distracting attention, or because paleontologists genuinely underestimated its uniqueness. Some say science, like fashion, goes through trends. One season it's all about horned dinosaurs, another it's duckbills, and Acrocanthosaurus just had the misfortune of showing up when nobody was interested in ridgebacked predators. You trail behind the fossil crew as they haul plaster jackets into trucks. The bones are heavy, almost sacred, but to them it's just another day's haul. Years later, under museum lights, these pieces will be assembled, towering once again into the silhouette of a monster nearly erased by time. It's strange, isn't it? You were just there, watching Acrocanthosaurus shake bark from trees with its spines, alive and dominant. Now you see its ghostly remains cradled in plaster and burlap, vulnerable to budget cuts and academic neglect. Two worlds, the same creature, bridged only by patience and persistence. You brush red dust from your hands and squint at the horizon. Somewhere out there, more bones still wait, slumbering in sandstone, dreaming of the day another set of curious hands will lift them back into the light. And you realize you're not just following the dinosaur anymore. You're following the hunters who dragged it out of silence. Without them, there'd be no high-spined lizard in your imagination tonight. Just stone, just shadows, just absence. The trucks rumble away, red dust trailing behind them, and you tag along in spirit as the fossils of Acrocanthosaurus find their way into dimly lit museum basements. Wrapped in plaster, stacked like forgotten furniture, they sit in storage while other dinosaurs hog the limelight. The mighty Tyrannosaurus gets roaring reconstructions, the graceful Velociraptor sneaks into Hollywood stardom, but Acrocanthosaurus, strange, spiny, and inconveniently incomplete, waits in silence. You find yourself in a smoky university office in the early 1950s. Papers are scattered across a heavy oak desk. Two paleontologists argue in low voices, though low is relative. Every few minutes, one of them slaps a page or a bone photograph with enough force to rattle the coffee cups. You lean against the wall, invisible, listening to the debates that would shape how the high-spined lizard was remembered or ignored. The first voice insists, this animal deserves its own name, its own pedestal. Look at those vertebrae, look at those ridiculous spines. Nothing else matches. The second scoffs. Please. It's just another off-brand carnivore. Maybe a relative of Allosaurus. Maybe some early Carcharodontosaurid. Don't waste ink on reinvention. This, you realize, is how naming works in science. Behind every elegant Latin title in a museum hall, there's a trail of squabbling, pride, and sometimes bruised egos. When Acrocanthosaurus was officially christened in 1950, it was granted a name that literally means high-spined lizard, a straightforward nod to its most striking feature. But even then, arguments swirled. Did it deserve its own genus? Or was it simply a tall-spined cousin of something already known? Mainstream fact. The type specimen of Acrocanthosaurus atticensis was described by paleontologists J. Willis Stovall and Juan Langston. They studied the odd vertebrae and teeth, deciding this predator wasn't just a recycled cast of another species. Still, their naming didn't set the world on fire. Hard to compete with celebrity dinos like Stegosaurus and T-Rex. Quirky tidbit. Early drafts of the name almost lean toward Altospinax, a title already floating around Europe for a different fossil with tall spines. Imagine the confusion. Dinosaurs on two continents sharing a nearly identical name. It's like calling two different celebrities, The Rock, and expecting fans not to mix them up. Historians still argue whether Acrocanthosaurus should be grouped tightly with Allosaurus, treated as a transitional predator between Jurassic giants and later Cretaceous apex hunters, or whether it really earned its spotlight as a unique lineage. Every time a new bone surfaces, another tooth, another claw, papers come flying out, reshuffling its family tree like some prehistoric game of musical chairs. You drift back to the fossil hall, where museum workers finally mount an Acrocanthosaurus skeleton for display. Visitors shuffle past, wide-eyed, children pointing at the serrated spines like a row of shark fins. But in the staff lounge, scientists continue their whispered battles. Was it more closely related to the African Carcharodontosaurus? Did it hunt alone or in packs? Did those spines even matter, or were they just evolutionary overkill? The debates echo like courtroom arguments, endless and unresolved. The bones are mute, but the people are loud. And you stand in the middle, smiling at the irony. A dinosaur once nearly forgotten is now kept alive not by its roars, but by academic bickering and the stubbornness of scientists who can't agree on its place in history. You leave the museum arguments behind, their voices dissolving into static, and suddenly the air grows warm again. Dusty plaster walls fade into a wide, green horizon. The early Cretaceous returns, lush and swampy, as if it's been waiting for you to step back through the doorway of time. You feel damp soil underfoot, reeds brushing against your arms, and hear the low gurgle of a river curving lazily nearby. This is Acrocanthosaurus country. Not the dry deserts you might picture when you think of dinosaur land, but fertile floodplains, endless forests, and waterways pulsing with life. You wander along a riverbank where water glitters like molten bronze in the afternoon sun. Conifers and cycads loom overhead, their roots twisting into mud. Ferns sprawl across open ground, offering shelter to little mammals darting like shadows. Every breath tastes like wet leaves and moss. You pause as a dragonfly the size of your hand buzzes past, its wings catching the light like stained glass. Somewhere deeper in the marsh, a frog the size of a cat croaks once, then falls silent. It's easy to forget in this stillness that a predator reigns here, one you've already glimpsed. 6 tons of muscle and ridged spines, lurking where the forest breaks into open spaces. This is its hunting ground. Mainstream fact. During the early Cretaceous, much of what is now North America was covered by river deltas, coastal plains, and lush forests. The continent looked very different. Higher sea levels carved shallow inland seas, while humid climates fed dense vegetation. Acrocanthosaurus thrived in this warm, wet world, one of the largest predators in its ecosystem. Quirky tidbit. Some fossilized footprints in Texas, massive 3-toed impressions pressed into ancient mud, may actually record the paths of Acrocanthosaurus itself. Imagine stumbling across them today. Enormous tracks stretching across rock, like the ghost of a parade you missed by 110 million years. Local ranchers once found these prints and used them as swimming holes before scientists realized what they really were. Talk about a backyard pool with personality. You tread carefully into a clearing where sunlight pours through a gap in the canopy. Here, the prey animals gather. Herds of Tenontosaurus move nervously along the water's edge, their tails swaying like metronomes as they keep half an eye on the river and half on the trees. Small nodosaurs shuffle past, their armor plates glinting under the sun, while a pair of iguanodonts dip their muzzles to drink. The whole scene hums with uneasy peace, like a picnic under the shadow of a watchtower. You realize the land itself shapes behavior. Floodplains invite herds to graze but also funnel them into predictable paths, perfect for ambush. Rivers quench thirst but force prey into open spaces where cover is scarce. Even the wind, carrying scents downstream, betrays the presence of animals before they can see each other. Everything here, the soil, the plants, the shifting water, conspires to make predator and prey dance their eternal chase. Historians still argue whether Acrocanthosaurus preferred ambushing prey in thick forests or stalking across open floodplains. Some evidence suggests it lurked near waterways, using trees for cover before lunging at drinking herds. Others argue it roamed wide, relying on stamina and intimidation to corner its meals. You tilt your head, trying to imagine both, and realize either way, life here is shaped by the ground beneath your feet. You take a slow breath, letting the humid air fill your lungs, and glance around at the forest rising in every direction. The hunting grounds stretch endlessly, alive with calls and footsteps, all of it balanced on the knife's edge of survival. And somewhere out there, behind the curtain of green, the high-spined lizard prowls, ruler of this ancient stage. The river bends out of sight, its surface rippling like a ribbon of bronze under the afternoon sun, and you trail the edge of the clearing where the herds linger. You can almost taste their tension, the way every flick of a tail and shuffle of a hoof is just one heartbeat away from panic. You press yourself lower, crouching behind a curtain of cycads, because you're not here for the river itself. You're here for the menu, the roster of animals unfortunate enough to live alongside Acrocanthosaurus. First up, Tenontosaurus. They're everywhere, the Cretaceous equivalent of neighborhood deer, except a lot bulkier and with tails that could break your legs in a single swipe. Herds of them shuffle through the grass, heads bobbing as they graze, keeping juveniles tucked close like living shields. They're nervous creatures, their bodies always half ready to bolt. You can't blame them. Fossil sites have been found with Tenontosaurus bones tangled among Acrocanthosaurus teeth, like leftovers in a forgotten lunchbox. The connection is too close to ignore. Mainstream fact: Tenontosaurus remains are among the most commonly found herbivore fossils in the same regions as Acrocanthosaurus. This has led many paleontologists to conclude that the ridgebacked predator frequently hunted them. Some sites even preserve tooth marks on Tenontosaurus bones, clear evidence of the hunter's bite. You shift your gaze to a different silhouette, a low, armored lump trudging across the clearing. Nodosaurs. Imagine a tank covered in bony plates, dragging its heavy body forward with slow determination. They're not flashy, but their defense is impressive. You imagine Acrocanthosaurus circling one like a wolf around a porcupine, deciding whether dinner is worth a mouthful of spikes. Quirky tidbit? Fossilized nodosaur skin impressions show patterns of scales and armor so detailed they almost look like medieval mosaics. Somewhere in Alberta, an incredibly preserved nodosaur fossil even still had its skin pigments intact, like a statue carved straight out of time. If Acrocanthosaurus ever tried biting one of those, it probably came away regretting the dental bill. And then, there are the sauropods. Long-necked giants lumbering at the edges of the forest, necks sweeping through trees like living cranes. They're fewer in number here, but when they appear, they shift the entire landscape just by existing. You watch as one dips its head, stripping branches in a lazy motion. It doesn't seem to notice, or care, that predators lurk nearby. An adult sauropod is nearly untouchable, too large even for a 6-ton hunter. But the calves, trailing awkwardly beside their towering parents? Those are stories waiting to happen. Historians still argue whether Acrocanthosaurus regularly attempted to hunt sauropods or simply scavenged their remains. Some claim its sheer size suggests it could have taken down smaller juveniles, while others point to the dangers. One misplaced stomp from a sauropod foot and even the fiercest predator would be flattened. You picture it for a moment, the high-spined lizard darting in, spines bristling, jaws clamping on a struggling youngster while the herd trumpets in panic. Risky business, sure, but hunger doesn't leave room for caution. The clearing ripples with activity. Tenontosaurus keeping low, nodosaurs grinding forward like armored bulldogs, sauropods looming in the distance. You realize this ecosystem is like a buffet, though buffet is probably not the most flattering word when you're part of it. Acrocanthosaurus didn't have the luxury of choice every day. Sometimes it chased the fast, sometimes it gambled with the armored, and sometimes it tested its luck against the titans. You smile a little, imagining modern fast food menus written in dinosaur terms. Tonight's special, one anxious Tenontosaurus, lightly trampled. Side of nodosaur spikes, if you're brave enough. And for dessert, maybe sauropod calf a la mudslide. Not exactly a Michelin star selection, but when you're 6 tons of hungry reptile, you take what you can get. The herd shifts again, eyes flicking toward the treeline. Something heavy stirs the ferns, though you can't yet see it. But you know, the menu has been set, and the chef is already on his way. The air thickens, the forest edge rustles, and suddenly you're aware of weight. Not your own. You could stand on a bathroom scale all day and never feel this, but the colossal heaviness of something that moves with purpose. The herds sense it too. Tenontosaurus lift their heads in unison, nostrils flaring, tails stiff. A nodosaur freezes mid-step, muscles tensed beneath its armor. Even the sauropod calf, blissfully clumsy just moments ago, presses closer to its mother's towering legs. And then, from the shadows, Acrocanthosaurus steps into the clearing. Its spine sliced the sky like a jagged crown, but what captures you now isn't their shape, it's the motion beneath them. The creature is walking, and every step is a contradiction. 6 tons of bone and muscle moving with an eerie kind of grace. Its long legs flex and extend like pistons, but with a smoothness that makes it seem less like a stomping brute and more like a predator tuned for endurance. Mainstream fact. Acrocanthosaurus, despite its bulk, shows skeletal adaptations suggesting it was capable of sustained walking and bursts of speed. Tracks attributed to it in Texas reveal strides that could stretch over 3 meters, implying a surprisingly efficient gait for such a heavy animal. You crouch lower as it advances, shoulders swaying slightly, tail counterbalancing with a gentle whip. Every muscle moves like coiled ropes sliding under its hide. There's no wasted effort. This is not the lumbering march of something clueless, but the calculated rhythm of a professional hunter. The predator tests its pace, shifting from a slow stalk to a quicker stride. The ground trembles just enough for you to notice, though not quite the cartoonish earthquake Hollywood would promise. The effect is subtler, scarier, the rhythm of footsteps you'd hear before you ever saw the shape behind you. Quirky tidbit. Some researchers have noted that Acrocanthosaurus had unusually strong forelimbs compared to other large theropods. While its arms weren't T-Rex tiny, they still ended in sharp claws, possibly helping it grip struggling prey. Imagine the indignity of being a Tenontosaurus, already terrified by a 6-ton predator, and then realizing those decorative arms are actually about to pin you down like a wrestler. Historians still argue whether Acrocanthosaurus was a sprinter capable of short, high-speed chases or more of a marathon stalker designed for endurance. Some trackways hint at quick bursts, others suggest deliberate pacing. You tilt your head, watching its strides, and wonder if maybe it could do both, switching gears depending on whether it was chasing something panicked or creeping up on something careless. The Tenontosaurus herd explodes. Dust rises, tails whip, and the sound is like a thunderclap of hooves, except these aren't hooves but clawed feet pounding mud. Acrocanthosaurus accelerates, strides lengthening, claws digging in for traction. It doesn't sprint wildly, it leans forward with terrifying efficiency, legs snapping like pistons, tail slicing air for balance. And you, frozen behind your cycads, feel the strange thrill of it. Not fear exactly, because you're invisible here, but awe, watching 6 tons of predator in motion, proving that size never meant clumsiness. You can almost picture how the story will end for one unlucky Tenontosaurus. A sudden grab, a collapse into mud, a cloud of dust, and silence. But the predator slows. The herd scatters beyond the treeline, too quick this time, too alert. Acrocanthosaurus halts, sides heaving with deep breaths, steam rising faintly from its nostrils. It doesn't look frustrated, just patient. In this world, hunger is constant, but so is opportunity. the hunt will come again. You ease back into the shadows, heart steadying as the high-spined lizard regains its slow, deliberate rhythm. You've just witnessed something most people only imagine. A predator in motion, graceful in its enormity, carving footsteps into a world built to carry giants. The clearing exhales. Dust settles. The herds retreat into the green maze, and Acrocanthosaurus pauses at the riverbank, its chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. You study it differently now. Not the muscles, not the spines, not the sheer weight of it, but the machinery hidden inside the skull. The head dips low, muzzle skimming the water, jaws parting slightly. The teeth are long, serrated, and cruelly recurved, perfect for tearing but useless for chewing. You can almost hear the water trickle between them. When it raises its head again, droplets bead along the edges of its teeth, catching sunlight like glass shards. Mainstream fact: Acrocanthosaurus had a skull more than 4 feet long, lined with dozens of blade-like teeth. CT scans of its brain case reveal large olfactory bulbs, meaning its sense of smell was probably acute, comparable, some researchers say, to modern vultures or bloodhounds. That predator wasn't just watching herds, it was sniffing out opportunities over vast distances. You lean forward, as though peering inside. The brain itself was small compared to body size, but packed with features designed for survival. Balance centers to manage its long stride, sensory processing nodes for sight and smell, and motor controls that made each strike fluid. The animal may not have written poetry or built monuments, but it had the tools to dominate an ecosystem. Quirky tidbit: fossilized skulls of Acrocanthosaurus show unusual ridges where muscles attached, suggesting an especially powerful bite. Not the crushing bone snap of E. rex, but more of a slicing strike. Think steak knives rather than nutcrackers. Some paleontologists joke that Acrocanthosaurus was less of a bite-and-hold predator and more of a slash-and-bleed specialist. Efficient, if a bit gruesome. The animal snorts, nostrils flaring, and you realize just how sensitive those airways might have been. Every scent, sap dripping from trees, the musk of herbivores, even the faint metallic tang of blood, would have mapped the world for it in a way your own nose can't imagine. You try for a second, sniffing the humid air, and laugh quietly at yourself. To you, it's just mud and greenery. To Acrocanthosaurus, it's a three-dimensional menu written in odor. Historians still argue whether its brain structure points to higher problem-solving abilities or just fine-tuned hunting instincts. Some claim its enlarged olfactory bulbs hint at complex tracking behavior. Others counter that brain size doesn't automatically mean cleverness. You tilt your head, watching the predator's eyes flick toward a dragonfly skimming the river, and wonder if maybe it wasn't about intelligence at all, just specialized survival. The Acrocanthosaurus lowers its head again, but this time not to drink. It opens its mouth slightly, exhaling as though tasting the air. Then it shifts, deliberate, sniffing upstream. Something out of your sight has caught its attention. You can almost imagine the neural circuits firing, scent processed, direction determined, body pivoting in response. Every sense sharpened to keep this creature alive. You grin at the thought. If Acrocanthosaurus had ever been invited to a modern smell test commercial, it would have aced it blindfolded. Perfume? Cologne? Forget it. This thing would have picked out one anxious Tenontosaurus, hiding 3 miles upriver, without breaking a sweat. The predator finally moves, long strides carrying it back into the forest. The trees swallow its jagged spine ridge, leaving only the impression of something vast and focused, guided by senses you can barely comprehend. And you realize, sometimes the deadliest power isn't muscle or teeth. It's the unseen ability to detect, to choose, to anticipate. You pause, letting the forest breathe around you, and take in the subtle symphony of the early Cretaceous. The splash of fish in the river, the distant calls of pterosaurs, and the gentle snap of twigs under tiny mammals skittering through leaf litter. But your attention is drawn sideways, toward other players in this ecosystem, the neighbors and rivals of Acrocanthosaurus. The predator might be the headline act, but it didn't exist in isolation. A small crocodilian slips into the river, eyes barely breaking the surface. You watch its slow, deliberate movements, realizing that even the most patient stalker needs to respect these reptiles. Mainstream fact: Cretaceous crocodilians varied widely in size and shape. Some were short-snout ambush predators, while others evolved elongated jaws to snatch fish from rivers. Their presence reminds you that danger here isn't monopolized by the 6-ton high-spined lizard. Predators competed, shared waterways, and occasionally, the smaller ones got meals they shouldn't have dared take. A flock of raptors skitters across a nearby clearing, claws clattering over soft mud. You notice how they keep distance, almost in deference, but their presence is a constant pressure. Quirky tidbit: some paleontologists suggest that these smaller carnivores may have actually scavenged kills left behind by larger predators like Acrocanthosaurus, essentially operating like prehistoric cleanup crews. Imagine a pack of jackals tiptoeing around a T-Rex-sized shadow, snatching scraps when no one's looking. The same strategy probably applied here: small, quick, clever, and always opportunistic. Historians still argue whether Acrocanthosaurus actively defended its kill from other predators or whether it tolerated minor interference. Some trackways suggest territorial disputes occurred, while tooth-marked bones hint at scavenging by competitors. You lean in, imagining a tense standoff in a clearing, the predator's massive jaws clamped on prey, a raptor darting in, a crocodilian lurking at the edge of the stream. It's an early Cretaceous version of a traffic jam, only deadlier. You shift slightly, noticing a lone, similarly sized predator on the horizon, a fellow theropod, stalking its own territory. They move in cautious circles, sizing each other up. There's no immediate clash, just silent negotiation. The ecosystem is like a crowded apartment complex. Everyone shares the space, but privacy and prey must be protected. And yet, despite the competition, Acrocanthosaurus holds the invisible title. Its size, its spines, its combination of speed and sensory power make it a force few rivals can challenge successfully. But even titans have neighbors, and those neighbors, crocodiles, raptors, and other carnivores, define the subtle rules of this prehistoric city. You glance back toward the river. Small fish leap as a croc snaps, herding schools like a miniature army. Raptors dart between bushes, calling to each other in high-pitched cries. Acrocanthosaurus moves methodically through the trees, its spines slicing the filtered sunlight, unaware, or indifferent, to the smaller dramas unfolding around it. Even the ecosystem seems to conspire against predictability. Storms could sweep through without warning, the river might flood and displace prey, and even a 6-ton predator could miscalculate a jump across slick mud. Life here is a constant balance between advantage and risk, between size and cunning, between predator and competitor. You settle back against a tree, letting the predator's presence fade slightly while still aware of the surrounding tension. This is not a solitary kingdom, not a monarchy of muscle and teeth alone. Acrocanthosaurus shares it with an ensemble cast, each species negotiating, competing, and surviving in its own way. It's a delicate choreography, and you've stumbled into a rehearsal that's been running for millions of years. The forest softens in the late afternoon light, shadows stretching across the riverbank like spilled ink. You notice a shift in the atmosphere, not the quiet tension of hunting, but something different, more subtle, more intimate. This is the private side of the high-spined lizard, the one rarely captured in fossil records or museum dioramas. Its rituals, its displays, the mysterious signals it sent to one another. Acrocanthosaurus pauses near a cluster of tall cycads, body partially obscured. You imagine it raising its spines, a subtle shiver along its ridge, an almost ceremonial posture. These movements might not be random. Mainstream fact: many paleontologists suggest that the neural spines were used in social or sexual display. Much like modern deer flaunt antlers or birds of paradise preen and twist feathers, Acrocanthosaurus may have communicated status, readiness, or health through the elevation of its spines. Quirky tidbit: some fossil evidence hints that juvenile high-spined lizards had proportionally smaller spines that grew dramatically with age. You picture them wobbling awkwardly at first, practicing the display, perhaps startling themselves with the visual effect. Imagine tiny 6-foot juveniles puffing up like miniature sailboats, trying to impress each other or a parent. It's oddly endearing, despite the fact that one day they'll grow into 6-ton predators. Historians still argue whether the sails and spines were primarily for mate attraction, dominance displays, or a combination of both. Some researchers propose that vertical spines could have caught sunlight to create a flickering visual signal in dappled forests. Others suggest the spines might have been brightly colored or patterned with skin, though soft tissues rarely fossilize, leaving this theory in the realm of educated guesswork. You imagine it for a moment, a high-spined lizard flicking its ridge, glowing in stripes of muted reds or yellows, a living billboard proclaiming, "I am here, I am strong, I am healthy." You notice scars along its flanks and limbs, tiny evidence of past struggles, perhaps sparring with rivals. The predator isn't invincible. Social life comes with its own hazards. Quirky detail. Some paleontologists have found healed bite marks on fossils, suggesting ritualized combat rather than lethal attacks, like a prehistoric wrestling match to establish hierarchy. It's like watching teenagers in a high school gym, except 6 tons of teeth and muscle are involved. The forest hums around you. The herds have moved on, leaving the clearing for quieter moments. Acrocanthosaurus sways slightly, testing the ground, maybe gauging the wind. You feel a strange closeness, almost as if you're intruding on a private ritual, witnessing something that humans rarely glimpse. A predator with depth beyond hunger and instinct, engaging in behaviors shaped by millions of years of evolution, by needs that extend beyond survival. You lean back, imagining the mating season, the silent communication through posture, scent, and subtle movement. Even in its massive, intimidating form, Acrocanthosaurus navigates a social world, balances risks, and signals to others in ways lost to time. There's beauty here, quiet and precise, that contrasts sharply with the violence of hunting. And you, a visitor from a far distant future, feel the peculiar thrill of understanding the creature in a different dimension, not just as a hunter, but as a living, thinking, social being with its own private dramas, its rituals, its unrecorded dances. The sun drops lower, slanting through the conifers and cycads in warm, honeyed beams. The forest exhales in golden light, and you notice the subtler changes, the ones that hint at the fragility of all this life. Precipitation patterns shift, rivers swell, and the ground softens in places that were once solid. It's a world in transition, and Acrocanthosaurus moves through it with the quiet authority of a king who senses the borders of his realm subtly changing. You trudge along the riverbank, noting how prey animals adjust their routines. Tenontosaurus herds linger closer to higher ground, nodosaurs stay even closer to cover, and sauropods shift their feeding paths to avoid low-lying wetlands. Mainstream fact: during the early Cretaceous, North America was undergoing tectonic and climatic shifts that altered ecosystems over thousands of years. Rising seas created inland waterways while gradually transforming forests into more open floodplains, which directly affected predator and prey distributions. You watch Acrocanthosaurus as it navigates these changes. Its long legs adapt effortlessly to muddy banks. Its tail swings for balance across slick surfaces. The predator's senses, so finely tuned, detect subtle differences in humidity and temperature, guiding it toward prey-rich zones and away from hazards like deep river mud or sudden flash floods. Survival isn't just about strength, it's about reading the environment. Quirky tidbit: fossil evidence from other contemporaneous species suggests that Cretaceous predators occasionally exploited newly exposed riverbeds after floods to scavenge vulnerable or stranded animals. You can picture the high-spined lizard finding a herd of Tenontosaurus trapped by rising water, taking advantage of both opportunity and misfortune. It's not cruelty, it's evolution in motion, pragmatic and relentless. Historians still argue whether climatic changes played a direct role in the decline of species like Acrocanthosaurus, or whether extinction was more gradual, tied to competition and prey availability. Some suggest that even subtle shifts in temperature or sea level could have fragmented populations, isolating individuals and reducing genetic diversity. Others argue that as apex predators, they were resilient and only fell when ecosystems collapsed on a larger scale. Either way, the message is clear: survival is never guaranteed. You notice the forest growing quieter, not with peace but with the tension of change. Trees fall more often, rivers carve new paths, and the familiar tracks of prey shift underfoot. Acrocanthosaurus moves with caution now, more aware than ever that the rules of its kingdom are in flux. Every stalk, every ambush must account not just for the prey but for the land itself. As you step carefully over a patch of soft mud, you reflect on impermanence. Even the dominant predator, ruler of floodplains and forests, is subject to the whims of climate and environment. It's humbling, realizing that no amount of size, spines, or cunning can make a species immune to the slow but inexorable changes of Earth itself. And as the light dims, you sense the inevitability of decline. Acrocanthosaurus continues to move, but the shadows grow longer, the herd's more cautious, and the pulse of the ecosystem shifts. Survival, once assured by dominance, now requires adaptation, and time is a predator that even giants cannot escape. The forest darkens, not into night but into the deep, green gloom of time itself. You step carefully over roots and soft mud, letting the distant cries of prehistoric birds echo in your ears. It's quiet here now, in a way that feels almost unnatural, as if millions of years of life have been compressed into a single hush. You can feel it, the long silence that will fall over Acrocanthosaurus, over this entire world, until humans stumble upon fragments of its existence. You trudge through the ferns and cycads, imagining the centuries slipping by, the centuries after Acrocanthosaurus and its contemporaries vanish into extinction. Rivers silt over, seas rise and fall, and forests give way to plains. Fossilized footprints and teeth settle into mudstone, hidden beneath layers of rock, untouched by wind or sun. It's a slow-motion disappearance, not dramatic like a meteor strike but methodical, inevitable. Mainstream fact: the fossil record shows that Acrocanthosaurus lived roughly 113 to 110 million years ago, during the Aptian to Albian stages of the early Cretaceous. After that, the species disappears from geological layers. While exact causes are unknown, ecosystem shifts, climate changes, and competition with other predators likely contributed. Its bones would lie quietly in sandstone for millions of years, waiting to be unearthed. You brush your hands against a fallen log, imagining the spores of ferns, the decay of plants, the life cycles continuing without the high-spined lizard. Quirky tidbit: in some formations, paleontologists have found Acrocanthosaurus teeth isolated from skeletal remains, suggesting that scavengers or erosion occasionally exposed fragments long before anyone discovered them intentionally. You can almost see small creatures gnawing or moving these remnants, unaware of their significance millions of years later. Historians still argue whether the apparent scarcity of Acrocanthosaurus fossils is due to actual rarity during its lifetime or simply gaps in preservation. Some suggest the predator was widespread but bones rarely fossilized in the right conditions. Others propose it was genuinely uncommon, an apex predator with a low population density, making each fossil a precious, rare glimpse into its life. Either way, the long silence persists. You follow a winding path, knowing that over eons, forests will rise and fall, rivers will carve canyons, and yet these remnants will endure, hidden beneath layers of rock. For millions of years, no one will know this predator walked here. The herds it hunted, the battles it fought, the courtships it staged, all vanish into memoryless stone. The forest around you seems emptier now, not lifeless but quiet in a profoundly ancient way. You sense the weight of absence, the kind that even the strongest predator cannot escape. Acrocanthosaurus fades from the land, leaving only impressions in stone, a legacy that requires patient human curiosity to bring back into consciousness. And in this silence, you understand something delicate. Time doesn't erase history by violence, it does so with patience. Life passes, fossils sleep, and the world moves forward, waiting for someone, someday, to brush away the dust and listen again. You emerge from the quiet stone corridors of time and find yourself back in a bustling modern laboratory, fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. Plaster casts line the walls like soldiers on parade, and skeletons of all sizes loom around you. Somewhere, a partially assembled Acrocanthosaurus towers on a raised platform, ribs jutting, spines slicing upward, tail poised in mid-swing. You can practically hear the whispers of paleontologists comparing notes, arguing over every centimeter of bone. This is the reconstruction phase, where imagination meets meticulous science. Mainstream fact: skeletal mounts of Acrocanthosaurus are rare. Museums like the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences and the Oklahoma Museum of Natural History have some of the few near-complete displays. Paleontologists use measurements, casts, and sometimes educated guesswork to piece together the skeleton, striving for accuracy while acknowledging that every mount is, to some degree, interpretation. You watch two researchers debating over the positioning of the shoulder girdle. One insists the forelimb angled slightly outward, supporting an ambush-style strike. The other counters that the fossil evidence is too fragmentary, and perhaps the limb was tucked closer, favoring balance over reach. Quirky tidbit: some skeletons are mounted with corrections added decades later, meaning a single dinosaur could change posture multiple times as science evolves. It's like watching a ghost dance differently every time someone cleans the floor. Historians still argue whether Acrocanthosaurus reconstructions overemphasize size or underplay agility. Some mounts present it as an impossibly towering, slow-moving brute. Others, sleeker and more dynamic, hint at a predator capable of bursts of speed. Every skeleton tells a story, but each story is filtered through human perspective, shaped by debate, preference, and the available fossil record. You wander past a table where casts of vertebrae lie next to notes, drawings, and measurements. Each bone is catalogued meticulously, yet small disagreements persist. How tall were the neural spines? Did the pelvis tilt slightly forward or backward? And what of the tail? Straight as a ruler, or slightly curved, like a pendulum helping with balance? The decisions may seem minor, but they change the impression of the predator in ways subtle and profound. You can't help but notice the human drama playing out here. Acrocanthosaurus, once nearly lost to time, now sparks pride, ego, and argument in modern scholars. It's almost poetic. A creature that hunted and lived millions of years ago still provokes discussion, disagreement, and fascination in its afterlife. As you step back, the mounted skeleton towers above you, spines slicing the air like a frozen wave. It's no longer moving, no longer stalking herds, but the careful reconstruction hints at every power and grace it once wielded. And somewhere, amid the notes, the debates, and the quiet study, you feel the strange continuity of history. A predator's legacy preserved not just in fossils, but in the passionate curiosity of those who refuse to forget. You wander down a dim corridor lined with fossil casts and framed paleo-illustrations, the hum of fluorescent lights like a faint heartbeat. Each image captures a slice of time. The predator poised mid-stride, prey frozen in panic, spines raised in silent display. You realize you're not just observing bones, you're tracing the collective imagination of generations trying to understand a creature almost erased by time. Mainstream fact: scientific illustration has long played a crucial role in paleontology. Before modern 3D modeling, artists relied on skeletal measurements, fossil impressions, and comparative anatomy to recreate prehistoric life. For Acrocanthosaurus, this meant sketching the exaggerated ridge, imagining musculature, and hypothesizing posture and behavior based on related theropods. Some depictions made it lean and sleek, others heavy and menacing, but all contributed to the scientific conversation. Quirky tidbit: early illustrations sometimes included whimsical touches. Some artists rendered Acrocanthosaurus with feather-like filaments along its back, anticipating discoveries in other theropods, or gave it dramatic expressions and postures, like a snarling lion frozen in motion. Imagine these images hanging on lab walls, scientists arguing over the authenticity of each snarl and claw angle, somewhat like arguing whether a cat looks angrier in a meme. Historians still argue whether certain artistic liberties in reconstructions mislead the public about the creature's true appearance. Some claim exaggerated spines or musculature exaggerate size and intimidation. Others argue that visualization is essential for connecting people to prehistoric life, helping audiences imagine motion and presence that fossils alone cannot convey. You tilt your head, realizing that even science has its stagecraft. You pause in front of a life-size illustration, The predator arches its back, spines catching imagined sunlight, teeth glinting, tail balancing with perfect poise. You trace the artist's vision with your eyes, noting how the depiction conveys both power and elegance. It's striking to see a 6-ton predator rendered not just as a monster, but as a creature of balance, purpose, and silent intelligence. Walking on, you notice panels describing its discovery history, field notes, sketches, plaster jackets, and debates over naming. The high-spined lizard emerges from obscurity like a character rescued from a dusty archive, brought to life by curiosity, persistence, and a little human obsession. Its story is one of survival against odds, not in life, but in memory. You imagine future generations doing the same, piecing together skeletons, interpreting behavior, debating posture, and imagining the lives of creatures that vanished long before humans existed. Each illustration, each mount, each fossil is a thread tying us to a predator that once stalked floodplains, reminding us how delicate and fleeting life can be, yet how persistent curiosity is in preserving it. And as you step back into the hall, the images and casts blur into a tapestry of history, science, and imagination. Acrocanthosaurus is no longer forgotten. It lives on in knowledge, in art, in the gentle thrill of discovery, and in every debate that keeps its memory sharp. The laboratory lights dim slightly as evening approaches, casting long shadows across the rows of skeletons. You stroll quietly, the polished floors reflecting spines and claws like ghostly echoes. Acrocanthosaurus towers above, silent and still, yet its presence is tangible. You can almost feel the forest floor beneath its feet, the mud squishing softly, the humid air carrying scents of ferns and herds long vanished. It's a strange sensation, bridging millions of years in a single glance. You remember the floodplains, the muddy banks, the distant roar of prey animals, the thrill of witnessing 6 tons of predator move with precision and grace. You've walked alongside the giant, watched it hunt, seen it interact with its world, and yet here it stands as bone and plaster. Time is a curious trickster, capable of erasing and resurrecting all at once. Mainstream fact: Acrocanthosaurus remains are some of the largest theropod fossils discovered in North America from the early Cretaceous. Its skeletal structure, with high neural spines, long forelimbs, and massive jaws, illustrates a unique combination of size, strength, and specialization. While not as famous as Tyrannosaurus rex, it demonstrates the diversity and adaptability of apex predators millions of years ago. You wander past a set of vertebrae laid on a table, imagining how they once braced muscles, held the ridge, and anchored a tail that balanced enormous weight. Quirky tidbit: some paleontologists speculate that in life, the spines could have supported patterns or displays that rivaled modern animals' most flamboyant signals, perhaps even glowing subtly under the Cretaceous sun. It's an image almost too whimsical to believe, yet plausible enough to ignite the imagination. Historians still argue whether the rarity of fossils reflects low population density, preservation bias, or both. Some suggest that Acrocanthosaurus was widespread but ephemeral, a transient king of floodplains whose bones survived only when conditions were just right. Others believe it occupied a more specialized niche, its high-spined body giving it advantages that allowed dominance without overcrowding the landscape. Either way, you sense that each fragment, each tooth, each vertebra is a whisper across deep time. As you pause in front of the mounted skeleton, the long tail extending behind like a pendulum frozen mid-swing, you feel a subtle kinship. The predator no longer roams in the living world, yet it lingers in human memory, in debate, in careful measurement, and in imagination. The hunt is over, the herd's gone, the river's long changed, but the story persists, stretching across millions of years to reach this quiet hall. You step back, taking a deep breath of recycled air, and imagine the quiet floodplains again. The splashing water, the rustling trees, the smell of mud and greenery, the sharp awareness of predator and prey. Acrocanthosaurus is gone. Yet in your mind, in history, in science, it moves on, graceful, dangerous, and unforgettable. You leave the lab with one final thought. The giant may have vanished, but the curiosity, the discovery, the thrill of seeing it alive through fossils and imagination that endures. The lights dim fully now, and the bustle of the lab, the echoing footsteps, the faint hum of machinery, all of it fades into the background. You settle into the quiet, letting your mind drift gently back through the floodplains and forests you've walked, the rivers that glimmered in sunlight, and the 6-ton predator that moved with surprising grace and purpose. The world is softening around you, edges blurring, colors fading to muted greens and browns, until the landscape becomes more feeling than detail, more memory than map. You breathe slowly, letting the air fill your lungs as if it carries the scents of prehistoric mud and wet leaves, and each exhale releases a little of the tension you didn't realize had accumulated. The animals you observed, the Acrocanthosaurus, the nodosaurs, the wary sauropods, fade into the underbrush, their movements quieting. The river's gurgle slows, the croaks of amphibians retreat, and even the whisper of the wind through conifers softens to nothing. You imagine Acrocanthosaurus resting, spines lowered, muscles uncoiling in the evening heat, a living presence that has finally paused its eternal vigil. Time stretches and blends. Millions of years compress, the rise and fall of seas, the shifting of continents, the slow burial of bones in sandstone. All these epics fold gently around the creature you have followed. You sense not loss, but continuity, life cycles, extinction, discovery, and memory interweaving to form a tapestry that survives even when its threads seem frayed. Fossils may lie hidden, debates may continue, and reconstructions may change, but curiosity, the human desire to see, to know, to imagine, acts as a bridge, connecting past and present, predator and observer. Your mind wanders now to quieter reflections, the kind that hover just at the edge of consciousness. The vastness of time, the persistence of life, the fleeting moments of triumph and danger in a world that no longer exists, all are softened into understanding. You feel a gentle reassurance, a sense of peace, knowing that the giant high-spined predator, though extinct, lives in the meticulous hands of scientists, in the imagination of those who picture it stalking floodplains, and in your own quiet journey tonight. And so, you drift further, letting the gentle pulse of ancient forests, slow rivers, and patient predators lull you. The tension of chase, the thrill of discovery, the weight of history, they all ease away. The world becomes calm, a soft continuum of breath, thought, and memory. You are safe. The predator sleeps, the forests wait, and you rest, carried by the quiet rhythm of deep time and the enduring presence of a creature that will never fully vanish. Now, dim your lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the whispers of history guide you gently into sleep. You have walked with giants, observed the rhythms of life and death, and emerged with wonder and calm. The story rests now, and so do you.